Dear friend, let me ask you something from the heart. How many times in your life have you been swept away by a wave of emotion, only to look back later and feel nothing but exhaustion and regret? Probably more times than you can count, right? One harsh word, and suddenly you're angry. A cold glance, and you carry it with you all day. A simple critique, and you can't stop thinking about it, as if it somehow defines your worth. Over the past 30 years teaching Buddhism in America, I've met hundreds of people caught in the same cycle, not because they're weak, but because they haven't yet learned one powerful truth. Reacting is instinct. Observing is wisdom. I remember a middle-aged man who came to me after a Dharma talk in San Diego. He said, "Venerable, I don't know why, but I always get pulled into arguments. At work, at home, even when I'm driving. The smallest things make me angry. I know it's not good, but I just can't help it." I smiled gently, placed my hand on his shoulder, and shared an old Zen story. One day, a monk was walking through the temple courtyard when a stranger accidentally bumped into him. The man panicked and apologized profusely. But the monk simply bowed and said, "You didn't push me. Karma did. I only observed." You see, a wise person is not someone who never gets bumped. It's someone who doesn't let the bump pull them away from their inner stillness. Reaction is the sign of karma still at work. Observation, the calm, conscious kind, is a sign that karma is beginning to dissolve. When you still feel hurt by insults, when you crave validation, or feel the need to prove you're right, what's really living in you is not your present self, but your unresolved past playing itself out. But the moment you learn to simply see without reacting, you take the first step out of that cycle. I want you to imagine this. You're standing by a river. In the past, every time a leaf floated by, you'd dive in trying to catch it, understand it, hold on to it, or throw it away. Now you just stand still. You watch the leaf drift past. No need to interfere. No need to control. You're no longer the one pulled into the current. You're the one watching the water and smiling. I'm not telling you to become indifferent. On the contrary, I'm inviting you to feel things deeply but not be swallowed by your feelings. One elder once told me, "I used to think forgiveness meant weakness or losing. But after learning to observe instead of react, I realized not reacting is the greatest strength of all." And it's true. You don't need to raise your voice to prove you're strong. Sometimes the greatest power is in knowing which battle not to enter. The Buddha taught, it is not the person who insults you that causes pain, it is your own anger that burns you. If someone hands you a cup of poison, you don't have to drink it even if they insist. Likewise, if someone throws harsh words your way, you don't have to receive them. You have the right to not react. You have the right to just observe and let go. In modern psychology, they call this conscious emotional detachment, where you're aware of what you feel, but you don't let it control your behavior. In Buddhist practice, we call it mindfulness and awareness nirm, vatingyak. And here's the thing. When you live like this for a while, you start to see something shift. It's not others who change. It's your way of seeing them that changes. What once made you angry now just makes you smile. What once hurt you now passes like a breeze. So I'll leave you with a small question. Have you ever tried just observing without reacting? Just once before replying to that harsh message. Before defending yourself in an argument. Before blaming someone who made you upset. Try pausing, take a deep breath, and observe. What do you notice happening inside you? Can you hear the voice beneath the noise? If you can, then maybe, just maybe, a piece of your karma has already begun to dissolve. I want you to take a moment and remember a time in your life, a moment when something bad should have happened, but didn't. Maybe you almost missed a bus, and because you did, you avoided an accident. Maybe you were clinging to a relationship that felt essential until you let go and suddenly felt free. Maybe a failure once knocked you down, but later it led you to something much better. Have you ever experienced something like that? If so, I want to tell you this. That wasn't just luck. That was karma being cleared. There's a story I often share with older Dharma students here in Northern California. A man who had spent years meditating and repenting for past karma once said to me, "Venerable, I don't know why, but everything in my life feels lighter lately. I used to feel constantly pulled into conflict, family tension, drama at work, people misunderstanding or mistreating me. But now, it's like something invisible is protecting me. The chaos is gone. Even the people who used to bring me trouble somehow, they're just not around anymore." I smiled and said, "It's because you're no longer standing in the current of karmic conflict. You see, when heavy karma is still active, we're like someone standing in the middle of a busy intersection. Any car could hit us at any time. But when karma clears, it's like stepping onto the sidewalk. You're still here, still yourself, but life's chaos doesn't collide with you anymore. Accidents avoid you. Toxic people steer clear. Negative situations dissolve softly, like a cloud passing overhead. This isn't magic. It's the natural harmony between your energy and your karma, just as the Buddha taught. The mind is the forerunner of all things. I want you to picture this. Someone is walking through the forest. They unknowingly get close to a venomous snake curled in the grass. Just one more step, and they would have been bitten. But in that moment, a gust of wind knocks their hat off. They step back to catch it, and unknowingly avoid a deadly trap. Would you call that luck? I wouldn't. I'd call it grace born from karmic release. When your mind becomes clear, free of hatred, greed, resentment, you stop sending ripples into the world. And when you're not stirring the water, the storms stop finding you. It's like tuning a radio. You only receive the frequency you're broadcasting. If you're vibrating with peace, chaos can't connect to you. A scientist once said, "Energy is the language of the universe. It responds to the frequency you carry." And the Buddha, thousands of years ago, taught the same. We just call it karma. I once asked an older student in our Sangha, "What's changed the most after all these years of practice?" She smiled, poured some tea, and said slowly, "I feel like life doesn't hit me anymore, Bhante. I still face challenges, I still live in the world, but I don't get knocked around the way I used to. It's like something's guiding me through the slippery places I used to fall." That's what it looks like when karma fades. Not because the world changed, but because you're no longer entangled in it the same way. Have you ever noticed this? You meet someone and instantly feel anxious, and later realize they brought trouble into your life. Or you narrowly avoided something and only later saw how much worse it could have been. Something unseen protected you. That's not coincidence. That's spiritual protection born from purification. And once you realize that, you stop asking, "Why me?" and start whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for this lighter path. Thank you for this gentle protection. Thank you for walking beside me quietly, invisibly." The Buddha never promised that spiritual practice would keep us from suffering. But he did teach, when the mind is cleansed, suffering no longer has a place to stick. So if you're in a season where life feels gentler, if protection seems to show up even when you didn't ask, if you're starting to trust that something greater is guiding your steps, then maybe you're no longer walking in the shadow of karma. Maybe you've stepped into the light, even if you haven't fully realized it yet. Have you ever felt this way? You've tried so hard to be loved, to be seen, to achieve something meaningful in life. But the harder you tried, the more exhausted you felt. The tighter you held on, the more things slipped away. And then one day, when you finally let go, when you dropped the expectations and stopped forcing things, that's when the good things started to come. Quietly, gently, like the breeze of early spring. Let me share a story I've never forgotten. A man once came to see me at a small monastery outside Houston. He was in his early 50s. He had once been successful, owned a house, had a good job, respected in his community. But when he sat in front of me, he looked empty. There was no light in his eyes. He said, "Bhante, I used to have everything. But when I thought I had it all, I lived in fear, afraid of losing it. And when I finally did lose it, my career, my marriage, my friends, I felt a strange relief, but also like I had nothing left." I asked, "And now? Do you want it all back?" He looked at me and shook his head slowly. "Number now, I just sit, watch the trees, drink tea. It's strange, Bhante. I don't want anything anymore. And yet strangers show up to help me. Old friends call to check in. Even a new job came out of nowhere. I didn't apply. They invited me." He smiled and said, "I think maybe when I stopped gripping so hard, things found their way back to me." And you know what? I've seen that again and again. When we're still grasping, we're like hamsters running endlessly on a wheel, exhausted but going nowhere. But when we finally stop, not out of despair, but from a deep internal surrender, that's when life begins to bloom. The Buddha said, "Desire is the root of suffering." Not because it's wrong to want good things, but because most of our wants come from a place of emptiness, not wholeness. Think about it. We often seek love not to give, but to fill loneliness. We chase money not out of need, but out of fear of lack. We crave recognition not to serve, but to feel seen. None of these are evil desires, but when they're rooted in fear, they lead to suffering. And karma, being the wise teacher it is, keeps circling back to show us that truth until we finally let go. Imagine your mind is a still lake. If you stir the water trying to grab the jewel at the bottom, it turns muddy and you see nothing. But if you stop and wait, the water clears and the jewel appears. You don't have to do more. You simply have to stop grasping. One older Buddhist woman once told me through tears, "Bhante, I've been through 3 marriages. I kept trying to be loved, but it was only when I stopped searching, when I finally stopped trying to fill the hole, that things changed. My daughter, who had been distant for years, came back. Old friends called. I wasn't empty anymore because I started loving myself. That moment humbled me, because it's not rare. It's a spiritual law. You don't have to try to be chosen. You only have to become whole from the inside out. When you no longer crave, you step out of the frequency of lack. And when you stop broadcasting, 'I need,' the universe stops testing you. Instead, it begins to respond not because you're more deserving, but because you're finally aligned. I know letting go is hard, especially for those of us who've spent our whole lives striving, sacrificing, hoping. But I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. I'm simply inviting you to let go of how tightly you're clinging to them. Because sometimes the pain we carry isn't from what's missing, but from holding too tightly to something that no longer belongs. So if you're at a point in your life where your heart is softening, where you no longer feel the need to chase, where you simply want to live more deeply, more slowly, more peacefully, then maybe your karma is wearing thin and fullness is on its way. Not because you demanded it, but because you've become the ground that's ready to receive it. I wonder if you've ever noticed this. There are people who walk into a room and instantly everything feels lighter. The air feels easier to breathe. They don't have to say a word. Just their presence is calming. And then there are others who may not say anything hurtful, who aren't loud or aggressive, but being around them makes you feel anxious, on edge, even tired. Have you ever felt that? One day, an elderly Buddhist woman came to visit me at the temple. She said, "Bhante, I don't know what I did, but lately my grandkids love being around me. They used to avoid me because I'd always nag, but now I just sit quietly, drink tea, and they come to me, talk, hug me, laugh with me." I asked, "Do you feel something's changed in you?" She nodded. "I think I don't feel angry at life anymore." I smiled, because that right there is a sign that someone has begun to radiate peace. The Buddha once said, "When the mind is peaceful, all things are peaceful." When you stop projecting suffering, the world around you stops reflecting it back. I remember a crisp autumn morning at a monastery in Oregon. A young man came to see me. His eyes were red. He said, "I don't understand why people avoid me. I try to be a good person. I don't hurt anyone, but my friends keep their distance. Even my parents avoid deep conversations." I didn't answer right away. I poured him a cup of tea. Then I said, "Hold this cup, but don't drink. Just sit. Look at me. Don't speak." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then I asked, "What do you see in my eyes?" He said, "I see calm, softness." I replied, "That's what you're missing. It's not that people are avoiding you, they're avoiding the unease you carry. People don't run from you, they run from the tension that surrounds you." You see, human beings are incredibly sensitive to emotional energy, even if they don't know how to explain it. You don't need to study Buddhism or understand energy fields to feel when someone is calm or chaotic. And when you truly step into inner stillness, you don't have to preach. You don't need to correct anyone. Your presence becomes the teaching. I've watched an elder monk who hardly spoke. He just tended the garden, swept the courtyard, cared for the flowers. But students gathered around him like bees to honey. Even strangers, people meeting him for the first time, felt as if they were being embraced, just by the way he looked at them. Once, a hot-tempered visitor got angry over something small at the temple. He shouted, ready to storm off. The monk didn't say a word. He simply poured a cup of tea and handed it over gently. That man went silent. And then he cried. Not because of what was said, but because of the peace that was felt. That peace cracked open the shell he'd worn for years. Imagine this. You are a lake. If you're stormy, people walking by will feel uneasy, even from the shore. But if you are still, if your waters are clear, then others can see their own reflection. You don't have to do anything. You just become a silent mirror. And somehow, others soften by seeing themselves more clearly through you. An elderly Buddhist once told me, "Bhante, I've practiced for decades, but I don't know the sutras by heart. I'm not good at giving talks. I just try to live kindly and quietly. Yet somehow, my neighbors come to me with their stories, their pain. They say I help them feel at ease, just by listening." I told her, "It's because you don't speak from your mind. You speak from the calm energy of your heart. We don't need to try so hard to change others. We don't need to tell them to calm down, to stop being angry or negative. We just need to stop radiating negativity ourselves." And then something shifts. They begin to change, not because we force them to, but because they no longer feel resistance from us. So if lately you've noticed people are gentler with you, if arguments have become fewer, if even the difficult people seem softer in your presence, then maybe your karma is clearing. Maybe you're becoming a breathing peace. You're not teaching with words anymore. You are the teaching. Here's something quite strange, but I've witnessed it again and again throughout my years teaching and practicing the Dharma. Sometimes, the very person who hurt you the most is also the one who pushed you closest to awakening. I want you to pause for a moment and think of someone who broke you to your core. The kind of person who made you cry in the dark, who shattered your trust in goodness, who made you question your worth, even your will to keep going. Can you remember someone like that? Over the years, I've sat across from countless men and women in their 42nd, 52nd, even 72nd. People who've walked through life's deepest valleys. And you know what I've noticed? When they first tell their stories, it's always with tears. But somewhere in that conversation, their voice softens. And they say something that leaves me silent. If it weren't for that pain, I don't think I ever would have stopped to look within. I never would have learned how to let go. I never would have found meditation or the teachings of the Buddha. One woman in her 62nd once told me, "Bhante, my husband left me for someone else. I thought it would kill me. But somehow, it stopped me in my tracks." I began asking, why do I keep clinging to someone who keeps hurting me? And that question, it saved my life. I listened, not because her story was rare, but because it was painfully familiar. Many people only find the doorway to their own inner world after their heart has broken wide open. The Buddha said, "Suffering is the path to awakening." It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? But think about it. When life is going smoothly, we often live from the ego. But real pain, that soul-deep ache, has a way of dissolving ego completely. And in that moment of cracking open, the first light of wisdom begins to seep in. I want you to picture a seed. It doesn't sprout in the sunlight. It begins in the dark, buried beneath dirt, pressed down by pressure and silence. And yet, it is exactly there that life begins. You're the same. Old wounds didn't break you. They grew you, not by force, but by depth, by insight, by the kind of strength that doesn't roar but whispers quietly from within. When karma is still unfolding, we blame. But when karma dissolves, we feel gratitude. No longer asking, why did they do that to me? Instead, we ask, what did I learn because of it? I once met a woman who'd been betrayed twice by those she married. She lost her trust, her sense of direction, her will to live. She came to a winter retreat, not to find Buddhism, but just to escape. And for the first time in her life, she sat still. She breathed. She stopped running from her feelings. After the retreat, she said, "I don't need them to come back. I just need me to come home." Dear friend, being grateful for your pain doesn't mean accepting what was wrong. It doesn't mean letting others off the hook. It means setting yourself free. Because if you're still holding on to blame, if your pain is still a letter you keep sending to the past, then you're not free to walk forward. Others may have forgotten, but if you still carry it, you're still chained to it. Gratitude doesn't erase the past. It transforms it into wisdom. I once wrote this in my journal: "The one who hurt me is no longer an enemy, but an unnamed teacher." Can you feel that? If today you can look back at old wounds without bitterness, if instead of rage, you feel stillness in your heart, then let me say this with all sincerity. You have healed. Your karma has shifted. And you have become wiser than you were yesterday. Here's something I'd like to begin with: a simple question, but one that goes deep. Have you ever found yourself stuck in the same pain, even when life around you changes? Maybe it was a new relationship, but somehow it ended just like the last one. A new job, yet the same old disappointment came creeping back. A fresh chapter in life, yet the same loneliness, the same emptiness returned. If you've felt that before, you're not alone. Because that's what we call a karmic loop, and at some point, we all get caught in it. I remember speaking with a woman in her 52nd after a Dharma talk in New Jersey. She told me, "Bhante, I don't understand why I keep falling for people who hurt me. I leave one, meet someone new, and it ends the same way. It feels like life is playing a joke on me." I sat quietly for a moment. Then I asked her very gently, "Have you ever stopped to ask, what part of you keeps choosing them?" She went silent. And then, for the first time, she began to cry. Not because of someone else, but because, for the first time, she looked inward. The Buddha once taught, when the causes and conditions are ripe, the result appears. When the lesson is learned, the cycle ends. Karma doesn't give up. It doesn't disappear just because we want it to. It repeats over and over, in different disguises, through different people, in different places, until we finally learn the lesson hidden within it. I want you to imagine this. Life is a classroom. Your painful moments are the pop quizzes. If you don't understand the material, the test comes back again. Same core question, just in new form. And it won't stop until your answer changes. Until you respond not from habit, but from awareness. One woman in her 62nd told me, "I realized I kept being treated like I didn't matter, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. And when I looked deeper, I saw that as a child, I learned to stay quiet just to be loved. I never learned to say no. That craving for acceptance made me choose all the wrong people." But once she saw that root, everything shifted. She no longer had to earn love by pleasing others. And kind people began to enter her life. You see, ending a cycle of pain isn't about avoiding life. It's about finally turning inward. You can't change the story until you change the storyteller. You can't rewrite the outcome until you rewrite your patterns. I've met people in their 72nd who look back at their lives and say, "Why did I keep getting betrayed? Why did I always end up used?" And when they finally ask that question, not with blame, but with honesty, that's when the healing begins. The Buddha said, "No one is truly your enemy. Your enemy is simply a lesson not yet understood. And once you understand it, those people, those roles, those painful scenarios, they no longer show up." Why? Because the energy inside you has shifted. Karma has no more reason to return in the same old costumes. I want you to think back. Is there a wound that kept repeating in your life? A story that played on loop? Ask yourself, what was the lesson? Maybe it was learning to love yourself. Maybe it was setting boundaries. Maybe it was letting go of unrealistic expectations. Maybe it was walking away even while still loving someone. And here's the strange part. Once you learn it, the pattern disappears. No drama, no explosion, just quiet release. A man once told me during a silent retreat, "Bhante, I no longer attract people who hurt me, and I don't need anyone to heal me either. I've finally learned to heal myself." I didn't say anything, just nodded, slowly, because I knew a karmic cycle in his life had just ended. And maybe, just maybe, if you've noticed lately that the same painful patterns aren't repeating, if the same toxic people are no longer appearing, if the old wounds no longer pull you down like they used to, then maybe you too have graduated from a lesson. Not because you've gotten stronger, but because you've become wiser. Here's something I'd like to ask you. Have you ever noticed how a whole day can fly by in a blur? but one deep, meaningful moment can stay with you for years. We live in a world that moves fast. Texts arrive in seconds. News never stops. Some people eat without tasting, drive without knowing where they're going, and talk without truly hearing each other. I once met a woman in her early 62nd at a weekend retreat. She came up to me and said, "Bhante, I have everything loving grandchildren, financial security, but I feel empty. Life just rushes by. I don't even remember what I ate for lunch. I can't recall the last time I sat down to drink tea without doing something else." I looked at her and gently said, "That's because you've been living fast, but not living deep." You know what I've observed? One of the quiet signs that karma is beginning to soften is when you naturally start to slow down, not because you're aging, not because your body can't keep up, but because your mind no longer rushes out of fear, fear of missing out, fear of not being enough. The Buddha said, "There is no path to peace. Peace is the path." And that path is never in a hurry. I want you to imagine someone who's always running, always on their way to something, always needing to do something, always reaching for the next thing. Then one day, they stop, not because they're tired, but because they realize where they're going isn't as important as how they're going. Slowing down doesn't mean giving up. Slowing down means showing up fully. When you eat, you taste. When you speak, you listen. When you walk, you feel your feet touch the earth. I once guided a retreatant in his 70s on mindful eating. At first, he laughed and said, "Bhante, I'm old. Of course I eat slow now." I smiled and replied, "It's not about the speed of the body, it's about the stillness of the mind." And as he began to chew each bite with awareness, to really taste his food, to feel grateful for the nourishment, he started to cry. He said, "All my life I ate to survive, lived to achieve. Now, for the first time, I realize a meal can be a sacred moment." Mindful living isn't just about food. You start choosing to speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to be heard to feel seen. A student once told me, "Bhante, I used to dominate every conversation. Now I just sit quietly, listen deeply, and people open up to me like never before." I told her, "That's because you're truly present, and presence can speak louder than any words." When your mind is calm, you stop rushing. You no longer fight life, you flow with it. You stop asking, "What's next?" and begin to ask, "How am I living right now?" And that question, that's the doorway to mindfulness. Think back to a recent day where you didn't do anything special, but felt deeply at peace. Maybe while sipping tea, tending a plant, listening to an old song. No one praised you, no one noticed, but you felt whole. That is living deep. I once taught a former CFO in his 62nd how to practice walking meditation. At first, he said, "Bhante, I feel ridiculous walking this slow. It's a waste of time." But after 3 days, he came back to me and said, "Bhante, I've realized I've never really walked. I only knew the destination, never the path." You see, those who live slowly aren't slow learners. They're people who understand deeply what matters most. Because when you slow down, you stop missing your life. You stop losing yourself in the pace. And you don't need a crisis to make you pause. You just need a choice to be here. So if you've recently found yourself preferring silence over noise, slowness over speed, listening over rushing to reply, tea over scrolling your phone, then maybe, just maybe, you're not falling behind. You're coming home, not to a place, but to yourself. I once asked a middle-aged Buddhist practitioner during a weekend retreat in Santa Clara, "In your most recent argument, what exhausted you the most?" He paused, then sighed. "It wasn't because the other person was wrong. It's because I kept trying to prove I was right. Every time that happens, I feel my heart tighten." And in that moment, I realized he had touched something profoundly true. As long as we're desperate to be right, we're not truly at peace. Let me ask you this. Can you recall a recent disagreement, maybe with a family member, a coworker, or even someone online? Did you notice how, once the conversation escalated, you stopped listening? You weren't searching for truth anymore. You were trying to win? If so, you're not alone. Because deep inside each of us, the ego survives by being right. It feels safe when it's acknowledged, respected, validated. But that's a fragile kind of peace, like a thin shell. And sooner or later, that shell cracks. The Buddha once taught, "It is not others' words that hurt us. It is our own craving to be superior." When you choose to be right at all costs, you carry tension even if the other person stays silent. But when you choose to be at peace, even when others misunderstand you, you can smile and move on. I'll never forget the moment an elderly Zen teacher in Vietnam was giving a Dharma talk. Someone in the audience stood up and challenged him harshly. The room stirred with discomfort. But the monk simply folded his hands and said gently, "I don't need to be right. I just hope you suffer less." The entire room fell silent. Not because someone won the argument, but because the speaker had chosen compassion over ego. You know, the further you travel down the path of inner transformation, the less interest you'll have in winning debates. Not because you're weak, but because you see clearly. To win an argument, but lose your peace, is no victory at all. One woman once shared with me, "I used to argue with my husband constantly. I was always right, but we grew further apart. It wasn't until I started practicing meditation that I realized silence isn't surrender. It's choosing to protect the warmth of your heart." I asked her, "How's it going now?" She smiled and said, "Now, my husband's the one who talks less. I chose peace, and somehow the whole house feels quieter." There's even research in psychology that backs this up. When we argue, the brain releases adrenaline. It gives a rush, but drains us afterward. But when we breathe, pause, and let go, our bodies release oxytocin and serotonin, bringing calm, clarity, and connection. You see, science is now confirming what the Buddha taught thousands of years ago. Being right without kindness is just another disguise for the ego. But true peace is always accompanied by compassion. And that is the mark of a mind that's stepping beyond karma. I want you to imagine this. You're in a heated conversation. Someone says something unfair about you. You know they're wrong. You have every fact, every reason, every right to correct them. But instead, you remain silent. Not because you can't speak, but because you see their suffering. You see their pain. And you don't want to add fuel to that fire. You stand there like a still lake. They throw a stone. The surface ripples, but it does not retaliate. The stone sinks, and the lake returns to stillness. If you've reached a point in your life where you're no longer obsessed with being right, if you can pause in the middle of a fight and just breathe, if you find yourself smiling instead of snapping, then maybe, just maybe, you've transformed a deep layer of karma within you. You're no longer right in the worldly sense. You're right with your heart. I want you to think back to the last time you sat alone, in silence. No phone, no television, no music, no one else in the room. Just you and your breath. How did that feel? Was it peaceful? Or did you start to feel empty, restless? And after just a few minutes, did you find yourself reaching for something? Your phone, the television remote, a cup of coffee, anything just to not be alone with yourself? If so, you're not alone. Because for most of us, silence is scarier than noise. I once asked an elderly Buddhist practitioner, "Why don't you ever sit quietly by yourself?" She answered honestly, "Because I'm afraid of the thoughts that come up when there's nothing to distract me. I'm afraid of memories, of loneliness, of having to face my life." And I nodded. Because that right there is the root of why we run from silence. It's not that we hate stillness. It's that we haven't made peace with ourselves. The Buddha once said, "In stillness, truth appears." And maybe that's why silence makes so many of us uncomfortable, because in silence, we can't pretend anymore. We can't perform strength. We can't hide behind words or smiles. There's no one left to blame, just us and the truth we've been avoiding. Let me ask you to imagine this. A quiet room. You sit alone. You're not doing anything. You're just sitting, breathing, feeling the air move in and out of your body. No applause. No conversation. Just you and this moment. What do you feel? If you feel peace, then I'm happy for you. You've touched a place of meditation deep inside. But if you feel uncomfortable or restless, that's good too, because you're finally seeing what you've been trying to avoid. One meditator once told me, "I used to fear silence because it reminded me no one really needed me. I thought I had to speak, do, help, just to have value. But when I learned to sit quietly, I realized I am still me even when no one's praising me, even when I do nothing at all." You see, it's in silence that we begin to hear the unspoken truth within ourselves. I remember an older man, in his 70s, living alone after his wife passed away. He told me, in the beginning I kept the television on all day not to watch, but to drown out the silence. But after a year of living with that loneliness, I was tired. So I turned everything off. And for the first time, I sat and listened to the wind, the birds, my own heartbeat. And strangely, I felt peace. He never called it meditation, but I knew he had stepped into it naturally. When our karma is still heavy, we're afraid to be alone because our minds are still tangled, still needing others to fill the gaps. But when karma lightens and the heart clears, silence is no longer emptiness. It becomes home. The Buddha spent long hours meditating in the forest. No people, no speech, not even the sound of temple bells, because he knew awakening doesn't rise from noise, it emerges from deep stillness. And it was from that stillness that his teachings gained a timeless power, because they came from a place most of us are afraid to enter. Absolute silence. I'm not saying you have to renounce the world, live on a mountain, or shut yourself away from life. I'm simply inviting you to try this. Mute the world for a day. Turn off the noise outside and listen to the voice within. Try sitting for just 10 minutes, doing nothing. No reading, no listening, no replying to messages. Just sit and breathe. What might you find? Maybe old memories. Maybe emotions you haven't processed. Maybe a question with no words. Or maybe a quiet kind of peace, like a small light waiting patiently to be seen. If lately you felt less need for sound, less need for constant texting, less need for background noise, less need for someone else to validate you, then maybe you're on the right path. Because only when you can truly sit with yourself can you fully show up for someone else. I want to start with a very simple question. Have you ever felt like you're carrying too much, even though no one asked you to? Your child is already grown, but you still worry like they're 5. A relative keeps venting to you, and you listen, then carry their weight in your heart for the rest of the day. You're always the one stepping in, offering help, holding space, and yet you're the one who ends up exhausted. If that sounds familiar, then you'll understand what I'm about to say. Compassion without wisdom becomes a burden. An elderly Buddhist once shared with me, "Teacher, I've always been the kind of person who worries for others, but the more I worry, the more I hurt. It's like I don't know how to stop. And now, I'm no longer anyone's support because I'm too tired to stand." I looked at her and gently said, "You help out of love, but love doesn't mean carrying someone else's karma." She was quiet for a long time, and then she nodded with a softness in her eyes, like something heavy had just been released. The Buddha once taught, "Who eats is nourished, who practices awakens." A wise person knows when to help and when to let go. They love without clinging. They listen without dissolving into the emotions of others. I want you to picture this. A calm, clear lake. People pass by and see their reflection in it, but the lake never holds on to their image. It reflects, but it doesn't cling. And that's exactly why it becomes a place of peace for others to return to. Have you ever had a conversation with someone, and after they left you felt heavy, even though they didn't say anything harsh? That's often because you unconsciously took on their emotional weight like it was your responsibility. I'm not saying don't help. I'm saying you can't save someone by drowning with them. I remember a young woman once came to me, her eyes tired. She said, "Everyone turns to me when they're hurting friends, family, coworkers. I always listen, but no one asks if I'm okay, and I don't dare say I'm falling apart." I asked her, "Why don't you say something?" She gave a sad smile. "Because I think, if I don't carry it, who will?" I replied, "A wise person doesn't carry everything. They teach others how to stand. Helping doesn't mean carrying someone on your back. It means helping them discover the strength in their own legs. If you're constantly worrying, thinking, and suffering for others, they may never learn how to grow. And one day, both of you will be exhausted, and the lesson still won't be learned." You know, I've seen so many kind-hearted people burn out not because they lacked love, but because they didn't know where to let go. They thought letting go meant abandoning someone. But really, letting go means respecting the law of cause and effect. Everyone comes into this life to learn their own lessons. You can offer water, but they must choose to drink. You can point the way, but they must choose to walk. A Tibetan master once said, "Compassion without wisdom becomes a rope that binds. Wisdom without compassion becomes a cold stone. Only when both exist together can we become a true refuge." So if lately you've been learning how to say no without guilt, if you're practicing how to step back instead of stepping in, if you're watching with care but not clinging, then maybe you're on the right path. Because you're no longer the carrier. You're becoming the space holder. You don't try to fix everyone, but you show up. You don't cling, but you care. You don't push, but you also don't take it all on. I invite you to place your hand on your heart right now and ask, "Is this mine to carry?" And if it's not, breathe out and set it down. Once, then again, and again, until you feel light enough to smile and strong enough to lift others without losing yourself. Dear friend, if you've stayed with me until the very end of this video, I truly believe there's a beautiful part of you A part that's longing for peace. A part that's searching for something deeper than success, money, or the noise of the world. Maybe you've walked through some difficult chapters in life. Maybe you've spent most of your years taking care of others. And somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask yourself, what do I truly need to feel at peace? And now, in the middle of this loud and busy world, you're beginning to slow down. You're starting to look inward. You're starting to realize it's not the ones who move the fastest who live the deepest. It's not the ones who speak the loudest who understand the most. You begin to choose silence. You choose not to argue. You choose to gently put down the weight you've been carrying, even if it's just a little, day by day. And that is a beautiful sign. No one may notice. No one may applaud. But that's how a soul begins to step out of old karma and into freedom. If this video touched something in you, I sincerely invite you to subscribe to Buddhism Seeds. Not just to follow more teachings, but so you always have a quiet place to return to whenever your heart needs rest. If something here felt worth holding on to, please like the video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes a few right words at the right time can save an entire soul. And if you feel called to, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story, because I believe you are also a seed of peace in this world. Wishing you a soft and gentle day, and if you can pause for just a few moments, to breathe and to thank life. That's where peace begins.